The United States has designed a tremendous variety of fighter planes to the point that some of them are unknown to most of us. Moreover, the planes we have today are the result of trial and error with older aircraft. Why the F-86? Is Avery a member of a very large family? Why do airplanes last more and more years in service? What was the first fighter jet of the United States? Or why did the F-105 have to be withdrawn from Vietnam? That's what you're about to find out. In this video, we'll examine each United States fighter jet individually, among which ground attack aircraft and fighter jets have been included. That is, other types such as transport or bombers have not been included. We will examine them chronologically to understand the entire process spanning about 70 years. In the early years, there may be some unfamiliar planes, but that's why I'm making this video, to show you the number of fighter planes that have been designed since World War II. Also, at the end of the video, I'll show you several charts where you can see which plane has been produced the most and which plane has been in operation the longest. And one last thing, the date when a plane made its first flight is not the same as the date when that plane was introduced, because the first flight is nothing more than a simple test, and when the plane is introduced, it means it's fully ready to operate. In 1944, the P-80 Shooting Star, the first jet-powered aircraft from the United States, flew for the first time. But actually, the plane wasn't ready to be introduced until 1945, and there wasn't enough time for it to be used. 1,715 units were produced during World War II, and the vehicle was also used in the Korean War. Later, it was replaced by other air superiority aircraft and retired in 1959. It's important to keep in mind that generally all the aircraft we're going to mention were sold to other countries, so not all the units produced were for the United States. In 1945, the A-1 Skyrider flew for the first time, a propeller aircraft focused on ground attack. It was introduced a year after its first flight and stayed in operation until 1973. That is to say, it was widely used in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and a total of 3,180 units were built. Next on the list was the McDonnell FH-1 Phantom, which flew from 1947 to 1949. This was the first jet-powered aircraft to land on a United States aircraft carrier, but only 62 units were built. They realized that developing new aircraft with modern technology was simpler and more economical than improving the existing one. In 1947, the Republic F-84 Thunderjet was also introduced, one of the most important aircraft in the United States, even though very few people know about it. It first flew in 1946, and no less than 7,524 units were built. As you can see, it's a subsonic aircraft due to its rounded nose with the air intake. It was retired in 1964, after 17 years of operation. In 1948, the McDonnell F-2 Banshee was introduced, a carrier-based aircraft that already had several improvements over the F-H-1. Although physically it was somewhat similar, this actually happened with the first jet aircraft, as they were all very similar. This one was operational until 1961, and a total of 895 aircraft were built. Another aircraft that operated on aircraft carriers was the North American FJ-1 Fury, which might seem familiar to you. Now you'll see why. It was introduced in 1948 and retired in 1953 with only 33 units built. You might think this plane was a failure, but actually it was from this model that the legendary F-86 Sabre was born. The next one was an improved version of the previous model featuring swept wings. It was introduced in 1949 and retired in 1965. A whopping 9,860 units were built. And given the success of this airplane, they tried to make a naval version. We're going to introduce them here to finish with the Sabre family, even though chronologically they wouldn't come right after. The FJ-2 and the FJ-3 Fury were actually two different airplanes. The 2 was a very quick adaptation of the Sabre, and the 3 was a more deliberate project. They were meant to be a naval variant of the F-86. While the airplane was impressive for the Air Force, it didn't fare as well for the Navy. And a total of 741 airplanes of these two versions were built. But after this one, another one appeared, the FJ-4 Fury, an even more improved version. This model was introduced in 1955 and retired in 1964, with a total of 374 units built. Despite the attempts to make this model successful on aircraft carriers, they didn't succeed. It operated for several years, but it wasn't a successful plane. Another very important aircraft that operated on aircraft carriers was the Grumman F-9F Panther, introduced in 1949. These early aircraft marked the beginning of the United States' serious development of aircraft carrier procedures, a topic frequently discussed on this channel. 1,385 units of this aircraft were manufactured. An aircraft that has really surprised me is the A-2 Savage, a bomber that used a piston engine on each wing and a jet engine in the central rear section. This was done in order to successfully take off from aircraft carriers. It was intended to drop nuclear bombs, but the truth is that it wasn't very successful since this type of aircraft could already be designed with more advanced engines. That's why it was only in service for 10 years. The next one is the Northrop F-89 Scorpion, a fighter that could operate in any condition and was designed to be an interceptor. In fact, it was the first in the United States to take on the role of intercepting Soviet bomber planes. The idea was to launch a rocket-propelled nuclear bomb like a missile, to detonate it in mid-air and thus wipe out an entire formation of bombers. It was introduced in 1950 and 1,050 units were manufactured. Around the same time, the Lockheed F-94 Starfire appeared, a considerable improvement over the first American jet fighter, the P-80. This new version was introduced in 1950. It was designed to be an all-weather interceptor, meaning it could operate under any circumstances thanks to its nose-mounted radar. That's why you can see that the nose is rounder compared to the P-80. The Douglas F-3D Skyknight, later renamed F-10, was an aircraft designed for aircraft carriers, intended to be a night interceptor. The aircraft got its name from successfully intercepting and shooting down several Mi-15s during the Korean War. It was introduced in 1951 and operated until 1970. An extremely rare aircraft was the Buk 7U Cutlass, a plane with a very innovative tailless design. This aircraft could also carry out bombing missions. It was significantly larger than previous aircraft designs and curiously lacked flaps, utilizing only slats. It was introduced in 1951 and operated until 1959, with 320 units built. The Grumman F-9 Cougar was an improvement over the previous F-9F Panther. This design already had swept wings, something fundamental for flight near the speed of sound. It was introduced in 1952, and 1,988 units were built. After this, the F-100 Super Sabre came, the first United States aircraft capable of flying supersonic in level flight. Its design was based on the concept of the F-86, but with a slimmer geometry to be able to fly supersonic. That's why it's known as the Super Sabre. It was introduced in 1954 and was operated until 1979. The Douglas F-6 Skyray was an aircraft designed for the Navy with the idea of being an interceptor. It was the first carrier-based aircraft to break the speed of sound in level flight. It was introduced in 1956 and operated until 1964. The Douglas A-3 Skywarrior was a strategic bomber designed for aircraft carriers. It was introduced in 1956, and as you can imagine, it wasn't easy at all to design a strategic bomber that could take off. On the 100 meters of runway that an aircraft carrier has, 282 units were built. The Douglas A-4 Skyhawk was a light bomber capable of operating from aircraft carriers, also designed to replace the A-1, which we've already talked about before. This was a small plane, so it didn't need to fold its wings to take up less space. It was introduced in 1956 and operated until 2003, and here of course a special mention to the Argentinians who used it in the Falklands War. The Convair F-100-2 was the first supersonic interceptor of the United States that also had a delta wing configuration. It was introduced in 1956 and operated until 1979. 1,000 units were manufactured, and later this aircraft evolved into the F-106, which we will see later. The McDonnell F-3H Demon was a subsonic fighter that was intended to replace the F-2 Banshee. Introduced in 1956, it operated until 1964, and from this aircraft later emerged the very famous F-4 Phantom, since they share several aspects of their design. The Vought F-8 Crusader was a single-engine, supersonic air superiority fighter designed for aircraft carriers. The pilots of this aircraft achieved a good victory ratio against their enemies during the Vietnam War. It was introduced in 1957 and operated until 1976. The McDonnell F-101 was a supersonic interceptor. The history of this aircraft is fascinating because it was initially conceived as an attack aircraft to escort bombers, but it ended up taking on defensive interception duties. This aircraft was introduced in '57 and 807 units were built. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter was a supersonic interceptor widely used in all European countries, and of course also in the United States. It was characterized by having very little maneuverability since it had tiny wings. It was like a rocket with small control surfaces. In the United States, it was introduced in '58 and retired in '69. The Republic F-105 Thunderchief was a fighter capable of reaching Mach 2. It was this aircraft that carried out most of the bombing missions in Vietnam during the early years of the conflict. The aircraft experienced excessive losses during the Vietnam conflict, leading to its withdrawal from operations in the region. It was introduced in '58 and operated until '84. The Convair F-106 Delta Dart was a supersonic interceptor prepared to operate in any condition. Its design was based on the F-102, that's why they look so similar physically. It was introduced in 1959 and operated until '88 with a total of 342 units built. Next, we move on to one of the most famous ones, the McDonnell F-4 Phantom II. Yes, that 2 is because there was previously a Phantom, the FH-1. This aircraft was the first to be operated by the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, the 3 military branches. It is the most produced American supersonic aircraft with 5,195 units made. It is undoubtedly one of history's most significant aircraft. For example, Spain operated it. The North American A-5 Vigilante was a supersonic bomber capable of operating on aircraft carriers and carrying out nuclear bombing missions. Due to these 3 factors, it's one of my favorite planes, as I explained in the video linked here. It looks like it has 3 engine exhausts, but actually it only has 2 engines. The central exhaust is where the waste comes out. If you watch that video, you'll understand why. Even though it was initially designed to be a nuclear bomber, it ended up carrying out reconnaissance missions for the Navy. A total of 167 units were built. The Grumman A-6 Intruder was an attack aircraft designed to operate from aircraft carriers, with 2 pilots seated side by side. It was in service from 1963 to 1997 and 693 units were built. In addition to this, the electronic warfare version was released, the Prowler. It was very recognizable by its in-flight refueling probe at the front of the aircraft. The Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter was a fighter aircraft developed from the T-38 designed to be a light fighter. A total of 2,603 units were manufactured and distributed among all United States allied countries. In fact, Spain still operates it today, and many other countries do as well, such as Turkey or Switzerland. The General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark was an aircraft with which they tried to unify the wishes of the Navy and the Air Force to design a single aircraft. But the idea didn't work out, and the Navy refused to operate it. A total of 563 units were produced, operating in the United States from 1967 to 1998. And it was thanks to this aircraft that a lot was learned to later design the F-14 Tomcat. The A-7 Corsair II was a ground attack aircraft based on the F-8 Crusader, which had already been in operation for a few years. You can see the similarity between both aircraft in the air intake under the nose. The focus of this aircraft was precise bombing and close support. The latter means direct support to ground troops. It was one of the first aircraft in the world to incorporate a head-up display, which the pilot could use to help carry out the mission. 1,569 units were manufactured. The F-14 is among the most famous fighter jets ever made. Its variable geometry wings allowed the Navy to have a massive fighter that could operate on aircraft carriers. This aircraft was the only one of its time capable of launching the AIM-54 Phoenix, an air-to-air missile with a range of over 160 kilometers. A total of 712 units of the aircraft were built, which operated from '74 until 2006. The F-15 Eagle was a large air superiority fighter. It is the only aircraft in the world that has achieved more than 100 air-to-air combat victories and does not have a single defeat. This aircraft is capable of carrying a large number of missiles, which makes it an absolute beast. Introduced in 1976, this aircraft remains operational today. In fact, a new version has just come out, the F-15 Super Eagle. To date, 1,198 units have been manufactured. The A-10 Thunderbolt II is an aircraft designed for close air support, that is, to help ground troops. It has a rotary cannon that fires 30mm projectiles. The aircraft was built around this cannon with the goal of destroying tanks. It has 2 engines enclosed between its 2 vertical stabilizers, which allows the engines to be somewhat protected. And also, by having 2 vertical stabilizers, the aircraft has redundancy, since it's likely to take a hit at some point. Introduced in 1977, 716 units have been manufactured to date. The F-16 was another air superiority aircraft developed after the Vietnam War. Unlike the F-15, this is a single-engine aircraft, which makes it much more agile and greatly reduces maintenance costs. The aircraft has a bubble-shaped cockpit to improve the pilot's visibility. Its seat is tilted back 30 degrees to improve tolerance to G-forces. Introduced in '78, 4,604 units have been manufactured to date. The AV-8B Harrier II is the American version of the legendary Harrier, the most famous aircraft with vertical takeoff and landing capability, created to operate on light aircraft carriers, short runways, or improvised bases. It was introduced in 1985 and is still in operation today. Although in the United States they are about to be replaced by an aircraft that we will see now. The FA-18 was a multi-role fighter with the F and A in its name, signifying its ability to perform both fighter and ground attack duties. It is an aircraft known worldwide for its great maneuverability at low speeds, designed to operate from aircraft carriers. It was introduced in 1983 and is still in operation to this day. A total of 1,480 units of this aircraft have been manufactured. The F-15 Strike Eagle is a specialized version of the F-15 Eagle. It's different enough to be included in another category, since its main mission is ground attack and precision bombing. In fact, it could very well have been called the A-15, since its role is attack. The Strike Eagle version uses conformal fuel tanks, which are these right here. It's designed to be able to carry out the mission in adverse weather conditions and at night. It was introduced in '88 and 435 units have been manufactured. The FA-18 Super Hornet is the improved version of the F-18, larger in size and designed to be able to land back on the aircraft carrier, with most of its weapons in case they haven't been used. Like the conventional F-18, this multi-role aircraft can carry out any task. Introduced in 2001, 1,632 units have been made. The F-22 Raptor is the ultimate air superiority fighter with incredible maneuverability and stealth technology that would allow it to shoot down several aircraft without them knowing that the F-22 was nearby. This aircraft has vector thrust to give it extra maneuverability. It was introduced in 2005 and 195 units have been built. And now we move on to the F-35. The final aircraft is a single-engine, 5th-generation multi-purpose plane, as you're all aware. And actually, this aircraft has 3 variants, and they are so different from each other that we're going to treat them as different aircraft. The B version was first introduced and began operating in 2015. This one is capable of taking off and landing vertically with the goal of replacing the Harrier. A year later, the Air Force version was introduced. In 2019, the carrier takeoff and landing version debuted, featuring reinforced landing gear and larger wings. If we display all the previous information in a table, we would see the following each. RAW refers to an aircraft, and to the right would be the passage of time. In this way, for example, the F-86 Sabre can be seen to have operated from 1949 to 1965, and that it made its first flight in 1947. In addition, the number of units manufactured for each of them is also indicated. Also, the color scale represents the number of units produced. The darker the color, the more units were manufactured. Several conclusions can be drawn from this summary table. The most apparent observation is that designs have become more durable over time. After World War II, there were many airplanes that operated for very few years. However, since the 80s, you can see that airplanes have been operating for much longer. That's why the graph appears stretched to the right. This is because the designs are already very solid and technology doesn't advance enough to make an airplane obsolete in 10 years. In contrast, it previously took much less time from a plane's maiden flight to its actual introduction into service. Nowadays, there's a gap of several years since airplanes use much more complex systems. Also, if we look at the dates when a specific conflict happened, we can know which planes the United States had at that time. For example, all those found in this range were present during the Vietnam War, all these were present during the Balkan War, or all these were present during the Gulf War. With this, we can go one step further and look at which planes the United States had in a specific year. This way, we could find out what effect the arrival of a new president had, the end of a war, or an economic crisis. Another trend that can be noticed is that there are going to be fewer and fewer planes. It seems that in a couple of decades from now, the United States will only have the F-15 Super Eagle, the F-15 Strike Eagle, the F-22, and the 3 variants of the F-35. It's quite likely that the F-22 will be retired, so we may stop seeing it in the near future. This reduction in the number of models is because, over time, fighter jets are able to perform more tasks, so you don't need so many different models. Can we make another chart where the size of the bar shows the years in service of the different aircraft? In this way, you can see how the A4 is the aircraft with the most years in service, along with the F-15 and F-16. However, since the statistics only went up to the year 2020, the aircraft that are still in service have already surpassed the A4. Similarly, we can create a graph that displays which aircraft has the highest production volume. And if we look closely, it's the F-86 followed by the F-84 and the F-4. I hope this video has helped you learn a little more about the history of military aircraft. If you support this, we can do the same for Russian or even European aircraft. One last thing I have to say, there's a plane I haven't mentioned because I haven't seen it anywhere. Well, let's see if you can tell me which one it is in the comments.